One of the most powerful root drivers of chronic disease isn't talked about enough, and that is stress chemistry. When cortisol and nervous system loads stay elevated, it slowly chips away at your metabolism, your immune resilience, and how healthfully you age. What's interesting is that many cultures have built-in buffers to this stress chemistry in their daily lives. I'm Dr. Kenny, an IFM certified functional medicine practitioner, and today we're going to talk about 12 ancient habits that simplify life and may protect your long-term health. If you enjoy the practical breakdowns and lifestyle stuff just like this, go ahead and give the video a like and I'll make more like it. And to frame this conversation around these ancient habits, it's important to note that they weren't created as health strategies. They also weren't built around optimizing labs or biomarkers. They were just built into everyday life naturally. But when you look at these natural patterns through a functional lens, what stands out is the fact that each and every one of them contributes to bringing balance to the load of the stress chemistry and nervous system overload that we're going to discuss. These techniques make life more predictable and ultimately take load and pressure off of the nervous system and your stress chemistry. This is what creates the condition in which your body can repair, restore, and optimize. So that's the piece that a lot of people don't see when it comes to lifestyle creation and healing. So instead of thinking about these like 12 separate habits, think of them as 12 different ways of reinforcing the same internal state. Before we go through each of the 12, we need an understanding of why they work in the first place. If you look at most of the healthy aging advice today, it falls into one of three categories typically: what you eat, how you train, and what supplements or nutrition products you take. But your body really doesn't operate in these isolated categories from a functional perspective. Instead, it's influenced by three overlapping inputs that take a wider view of your body. That is your physical environment, your internal state, and your social health. These don't run separately either. They blend together, especially when we talk about the way they affect your stress chemistry. What I want you to deeply understand as we dive into this conversation is that your digestion, your energy, your recovery aren't just influenced by your habits. They're also influenced by the environment in which your habits take place. So that's an important nuance here. So when something feels off, it's not always about reaching for the right thing. Sometimes your body may be adapting to a pattern that you don't see or that you can't influence with something outside of yourself. And that's a major reframe in our society. This main shift of thinking shifts you from a question of what should I add simply to more of what am I repeatedly exposing my body and my chemistry to. So once you see that our stress chemistry and our health is affected largely by patterns, one of the first areas we're going to turn ourselves to is the nervous system. More specifically, we're going to turn our attention to the autonomic nervous system, or the one that we don't have conscious control over. And it influences everything from your heart rate to your digestion and your ability to shift into repair and recovery mode as well. What the autonomic nervous system does, aside from regulating these body processes we don't have control over, is that it determines whether or not your function is shifted more into an output and creation mode or recovery and repair mode. Because that baseline or summary of your autonomic nervous system function determines how almost everything else plays out. If it's skewed toward more activation, this is where it slows recovery or your body's ability to repair. This may look like high performance in many individuals, but at what cost to the underlying chemistry over time? The hardest part about this conversation is that these are things that we can't often perceive unless you're really dialed into your own body. So when we dive into these 12 ancient habits, this is the background we're going to be thinking of. One of the best measures that gives us some insight into whether or not your autonomic nervous system is shifted more in that output mode or recovery mode is a measure called heart rate variability. This is something you can track with a fitness app or something similar, and it measures the distance between your heartbeats. The less variation in milliseconds between your heartbeats means that you have less flexibility both from a mental and a physical output perspective. It essentially shows us how adaptable your nervous system is. So this isn't some abstract concept here. This is something we can actually ground in objective data and evidence very easily. And once you understand that, it's a little bit easier to sometimes track progress with these habits we're going to discuss and makes it a little bit more rewarding along the way. Because oftentimes we're talking about cumulative, slow-burning safety cues that we're adding to the autonomic nervous system. One additional layer, aside from just the nervous system alone, is also a focus on rhythm. So rather than simply copying these behaviors, hopefully you have a deeper understanding how each one of these sends a safety signal to the nervous system that can influence your body in a meaningful way, something that you can measure through HRV, for instance. The first group of ancient habits we're going to look at are anchored together by one word, and that is rhythm. Predictability in your life as a safety signal. This is a pattern that's seen across many ancient cultures. We're not talking about strict adherence to rigid routines. That's a slightly different external pressure, but rather your predictable flow and predictable behaviors throughout the day. The first habit we're going to look at is consistent daily timing in 5 main functions throughout the day for most people. Our human physiology greatly benefits when things follow relatively predictable timing patterns throughout the day. This includes wake time, as well as usually 3 meals per day and the time that you go to bed. These 5 time-bound cues anchor your rhythms from both a nervous system and a hormone perspective, body systems wide. And when we anchor into these rhythms, your body starts to anticipate the occurrence of each of these 5 activities throughout the day. For instance, your digestive fire will start essentially warming up before you eat breakfast or lunch or dinner if you eat at more consistent times. Oftentimes, energy becomes more consistent throughout the day, and it becomes easier to fall asleep as well. The gist for this first habit is that instead of reacting in real time, your body is adjusting to its expectations. The next ancient habit is a clear separation between work time and rest time. How many of you are working in some capacity when you wake up till you go to bed? In our hustle culture, we're especially challenged with ending work at the time that it actually ends. Many in the workforce are in a constant, always-on state, whether they're trying to meet deadlines or achieve the next bonus or high-performance measure in their workspace. Ultimately, there's no clear downshift or coming down moment from work, especially when it is so incentive-based. Over time, that shows up as background tension, especially to your stress chemistry. That becomes a tiger that you're running from, even when you're technically at home. In many people, that steady level of activation never fully resolves, and being adaptable beings, our chemistry starts to adjust and it becomes just our normal. That's something to look at. And the third ancient habit in this rhythm category is time separation between activities. This one's a bit more subtle, but transitions aren't as rushed. I get a very visual image. There's space between things, and I'm not just talking about travel time, of driving on the San Antonio freeways and wondering why people need to get from point A to point B so fast. Family time bleeds into TV time, and the list goes on. The way many of us operate our schedules is that work bleeds into after-work tasks, and after-work tasks bleed into family time, and oftentimes meals are eaten in the car or on the go in general. That buffer or period of time in between activities is very important for the body to anchor and also stage itself for the next activity. So when you look at all 3 of these rhythm pieces, you can see how they actually fit together. When that's in place, it becomes a lot easier to move between periods of effort, but also for your body to recognize when it's time to recover and reorient. Those are important signals to your stress chemistry overall. Once the rhythm element is in place, we can turn our attention to the environment around our activities. Your body isn't just shaped by your actions and your inputs. It's also shaped by your environment, light, sound, etc. These are constant inputs that your body is scanning, even though you may not be aware of them because we filter most of them out. Our fourth ancient habit is regular exposure to natural environments. One of the most consistent patterns across cultures and even the blue zones today is time spent outdoors. And not as a strategy or a must-do and pencil into my workday, but as a naturally incorporated part of life. This naturally encourages walking or getting your steps in, as well as getting exposure to the sunlight. This changes the types of input that your body receives as well. Less intensity, less uniformity, and just more variation, which allows for a certain level of adaptability and flexibility in our chemistry. It helps pull you out of that compressed indoor artificial lighting that we're constantly insulted with, and even gets you out of the concrete jungle experience, as many of us do. The fifth ancient habit is around lower sensory load in daily life. In ancient cultures, environments were generally less disruptive, less visually stimulating. In many health-promoting societies, environments tend to be less cluttered, less noisy, and less visually stimulating as well. And that matters because our brain, and thus our nervous system, is constantly processing these inputs that come in. It filters many of them out, but the central nervous system is still exposed to these regular inputs, and in greater amounts than ever. It keeps your physiology, especially your stress chemistry, elevated each day, even though we are technically adjusting our awareness to them. Again, we're adaptable beings, but to what end? And the sixth ancient habit is alignment around light cycles. This includes both morning light exposure and a gradual reduction of light exposure at night. Light is one of the strongest signals that our deep hormonal systems use to coordinate processes and reactions throughout the body. It influences how alert you feel when you start to feel tired and how consistent your energy is throughout the day between the nervous system and the hormone signals that result from light exposure. When your light exposure follows a more natural pattern, this is what helps to support our natural rhythms throughout the day. In a world where we are just inundated with fluorescent lighting, this is one of the most on signals we could be sending our brain on a regular basis. So use the light dimmers, maybe even red light at night if you're open to it, to start sending those additional safety signals to your stress chemistry. Even when your rhythms and your environment are dialed in, there's a very important piece, which is your internal state to consider. Because it's not just what's happening around us, of course, it's also what's happening within us that determines where in the output or recovery mode your nervous system is ultimately functioning. Habit number 7 is the built-in experience of stillness. Not something necessarily that is scheduled or forced, but something that naturally exists in your everyday life. Moments without the input and the noise and needing to fill the space, as many of us do in this hyper-aroused world. Those moments deeply matter because they help to shift the body and its resultant chemistry away from simple momentum. Ancient habit number 8 is slightly different, and it's a comfort with being alone or with solitude. Not to the far end of the extreme where we're talking about isolation, but the ability to be with yourself without needing some kind of distraction. This is a habit that often is one of the most difficult to access in patients who struggle with anxiety, past trauma, or conditions like ADD or ADHD, for instance. Much of the chemistry and the physiology lives in this heightened activation or lower set point of tolerance, if you will, when it comes to the nervous system. And practicing solitude can be one of the most uncomfortable things in these situations. But that discomfort is also a signal that points to the need for resourcing support. In a sense, this is the opposite of being productive and tying our worth to productivity. Over time, that builds an internal steadiness where you're not relying on external sources of stimulation for peace and comfort. The third piece is attention on one task and avoiding multitasking. Less fragmentation in these experiences and more completion in present moment awareness. This looks like eating without driving, or other multitasking, walking without distractions of talking on the phone or listening to music even, and having engaged conversations without splitting focus. When your attention is constantly divided across multitasking, your brain never gets to settle on a single task at once. This can show up as subtle anxiety or restlessness. To the brain, it leaves things incomplete and they can carry forward, and this leads to that baseline restlessness or anxiety that can color a person's day. So when you look at these three last habits, they form together a certain sense of stability. Stillness gives you a reset, solitude builds self-regulation, and presence allows your experiences to fully land in the nervous system comfortably. And together they make it easier to settle rather than constantly being in motion. Once that internal steadiness is there, we can now turn our attention to the outside world again. Our last three ancient habits are around physical and social stability. Ancient habit number 10 is around setting clear and honest boundaries. The art of saying no is something that many people struggle with in our society. Part of it derives from some of the previous habits we've talked about, including internal steadiness and productivity for the sake of productivity. But saying no is something that powerfully supports the system when something doesn't fit your capacity. And that matters a lot more than it seems, and I want you to understand this because every time you ignore that signal, it creates a bigger divide between how you feel and how you act. Not always dramatic, but when it happens often enough, it becomes an additional steady load of increased output versus restore and repair to your stress chemistry. Ancient habit number 11 is around supportive, low-drama relationships. We are more connected than ever through social media and other digital platforms. For better and for worse, this second piece is so key around the quality of your connections, relationships that are supportive, low drama, and ultimately less draining on your stress chemistry. And this isn't just subjective, the research supports this as well. I always say that health is contagious. A large meta-analysis found that people with stronger social relationships showed a 50% increased likelihood of survival across multiple domains when compared to those in less stable relationships. So the translation here is that the consistency, predictability, and support of your relationships translates directly into your own physiology and function as well. And ancient habit number 12 is natural movement built into daily life. And this doesn't mean that structured workouts are bad, but the more we incorporate natural movement into our days, whether that's walking, standing, jumping, kneeling, even squatting, these are things that support our baseline metabolic function even better than doing a quick 30 or even hour-long workout. That regular output keeps your energy expenditure spaced out throughout the day, which allows for more regular recovery tone in the body and the nervous system as well. So again, if we step back and look at all 12 of these ancient habits together, they're all feeding into the same stress chemistry conversation. It's not about the individual habits themselves, but rather what they create and what safety signals they send to our nervous system and our stress chemistry. Many people try to improve their health by simply adding more, when oftentimes we may be better served with looking at the environment in which our activities are taking place. Our rhythms, our internal environment, our stability, our movement, and our relationships. A great place to start, instead of trying to optimize everything at once and overhaul your life completely, because that almost never works, is to ask yourself the following questions. Where does your day feel rushed? Where does your environment feel overstimulating in your life? Where does your attention feel most scattered? And where does your output seem to not match your capacity? Those are the pressure points in your life, in your rhythms, in your stability that may need some additional support. And small cumulative changes here seem to make the biggest shifts when it comes to implementing these strategies with my own patients. When we talk about the nervous system and stress chemistry, another common conversation that comes up is how steady your energy feels throughout the day. especially when it comes to blood sugar balance and energy output at the cellular level. And this video here will help you understand some of those exact mechanisms and explain why you may feel stuck even though you're doing everything right. I'm Dr. Kenny, Root Cause Health Detective. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.